the story of how Jesus changes lives in evangelism and apologetics. One thing we love to talk about is a good testimony of what God has done for us. And so it is an honor to welcome to the ARC Show Eric Burstock, the author of this book right here, The Table is Already Set, where he tells his story. And so I'm glad to welcome him onto the show. Eric, thank you for taking the time to talk with me today.
Oh, you're so welcome. I appreciate it, Nate.
I've enjoyed reading through this book and the story. And so
Right.
we'll take a step back real quick. Tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Oh, I grew up in a typical Jewish upbringing. And what that would mean is on both sides of my family, my mom and dad were Jewish. And, I had Jewish grandparents on both sides. And we were involved in our local synagogue. And what was unique is as I grew up, besides going to public school for regular school, 2 days a week, I'd also go to Hebrew school. So for many years, I would learn Hebrew for that one day when a Jewish boy turns 13, then has to get in front of the synagogue, go up to the pulpit, and basically read from the Torah and get bar mitzvah. And then basically the significance of the bar mitzvah is that a Jewish person becomes a man. A Jewish kid, a child becomes a man. Yeah. So, yeah,
Yeah. And I think it's some of those markers of maturity, those markers of manhood that I think
right,
in our culture is missing. And so that's a little bit of a side conversation, but those
right.
types of ceremonies and those important milestones to reach, it's something that's important in development for particularly men. But I know there's also bar mitzvahs and then bat mitzvahs as well.
Exactly. Yes. Yep.
But okay, so you have this Jewish background, and
Right.
we're gonna talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But
Sure.
real quick, so as you have your story, and I've enjoyed the story of your marriage and you meeting your wife and all of those
Right.
things. What led you to take your story and put it down in a book?
I just felt that there would be no other way to really share my unique story of, being brought up in a Jewish environment and then ultimately becoming a believer in the Jewish Messiah and sharing that great position, with other Christians. And I thought I could multiply my testimony the best way by writing the book and just telling my story.
Hmm.
And that's what led me to do it.
Okay. And the subtitle is A Beautiful Love Story Between a Jewish Man and a Christian Woman. And so
Right.
continue from there. So you have this Jewish upbringing and then
Right.
keep on with your story.
Yeah. So I graduated from college, and my first job was with Amtrak, the National Railroad Passenger Service. We were, when I say we, my wife to be, who I met at the job, we were contract auditors, and just so happened that they called all the auditors into Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, for a Christmas party. And there was an unbelievable amount of food and alcohol. And out of nowhere, Bonnie, who turned out to be my wife, came up to me and she said, introduced herself and said, you look like you're drinking orange juice. And I said, yeah. She said, what, there's so much other stuff here to drink. Why are you drinking orange juice? I said, well, I drank enough in college and I'm on a health kick and I just don't think it's a healthy thing for me to be drinking alcohol anymore. So then when I looked at her, what she was drinking, it looked like she was drinking a Coca-Cola. And I said, you don't appear to be drinking alcohol either. Can you explain why? And she said, well, I just turned my life over to Christ and I just don't feel the need for it. So that's kind of where it started. And then when she explained the fact that she had accepted the Lord as her Savior, she went on further to say, and this is the miraculous part of the story is that she claimed that she had accepted the Jewish Messiah. And I had never heard anything like that before. The Jewish Messiah. She's accepted the Jewish Messiah. I mean, that's our Messiah. And then she went on to say that basically that we started to spend some time together, and she challenged me. She said, "Eric, would you be willing to read the New Testament?" And I said, "Bonnie, I'm Jewish, and we don't believe in the New Testament." And I just basically had no interest in reading the New Testament. And she was really smart. Again, she said, "Eric, would you would you would you read the Old Testament?" I said, "I don't have any problem reading the Old Testament. That's our book." So I actually read the entire Old Testament and set out to prove that there was no Jesus in the Old Testament. That was my goal. And I would read the Old Testament, and I started to highlight and underline throughout the Old Testament. I'd come to a verse and I'd say, "Oh my gosh, this is talking about Jesus." Then I'd go someplace else, and I'd say, "This is talking about Jesus." Then I'd go on, and ultimately, probably Isaiah 53 of all the verses. That's very common for Jewish people who do get saved. It's that verse that when you read that, it can't be speaking of anyone other than Jesus as the Messiah. And I just I basically even fought it after I had read all that. I was still finding the fact that I was brought up Jewish, that I just can't be a Christian. I just you can't be both. You can't go north and south at the same time. But I actually got a hold of a book that was written by a professor at Moody Bible Institute. It was Dr. Goldberg, and basically we were in Chicago visiting Bonnie's parents. They happened to live in Chicago, and I don't know if you remember the old telephone slimline phones that you could pull halfway across the house. And I took the kitchen phone and I went into the bathroom. I guess I didn't want anyone to know that I was calling, trying to reach the professor at Moody Bible Institute. And Dr. Goldberg came right to the phone, and I said, "Hey, I'm here from Washington, D.C., and I'm in Chicago, and I read your book, and I'm a Jewish person. I'm considering, the scriptures. Would you possibly, be willing to meet me?" He said, "How about tomorrow for lunch?" I said, "I'll be there." So basically, when I sat down with Dr. Goldberg, what he showed me was it was very clear that uh, we as humans, we don't die for our own sins. There's always been a substitutionary death. And you go back to the Old Testament, obviously the animal sacrifice system was in place, and there was always had to be blood for the atonement. But again, at some point, the animal sacrifice system went out, the temple was destroyed, and it always promised that. And you go all the way back to Genesis, in fact, where Abraham took Isaac up the mountain, and they get up to the top of the mountain, and they say to the Lord that, it was Isaac who said, I see the fire, I see the wood, where's the lamb? And God answered in the book of Genesis that I will provide the lamb. So right there was I think, a very early prophecy that God would ultimately provide the lamb.
Wow.
Yeah.
God will provide the lamb. And so, as you're continuing on this journey and you're asking questions and you're researching and you're reading, uh, you had to work through a lot of that upbringing. Like you said, you're
Right.
Jewish, like that. You don't read the New Testament. How difficult was that from an emotional standpoint as you started to turn and maybe things started to click and make sense? Was that difficult emotionally, or was it easy?
It was difficult because in fact, I could drill back to this point. Growing up, I think every year, probably from about 10, 11 years old, my grandparents on my dad's side would always say, "Now, Eric, promise us you're going to marry a Jewish girl." And you'd say, "Well, why were they saying that? You have to realize I was born in 1955, so this would probably have been early 1960s. And the early 1960s was not that far removed from the Holocaust. And Jewish people had this fear that if Jewish men would marry non-Jewish women, we would further diminish the race after the Holocaust. So every year it was like certification. Let's call it 11 years old, 12 years old, 13 years old, 14 years old. It just kept going. Every year, pretty much, they would say, now, Eric, you're going to promise you're going to marry a Jewish? Yes, I will, Nan and Pop. That was my grandpa, my grandma and grandpa. Um, so I had never brought a girl that I was dating to my grandparents' house. They lived like 2 hours away in New Jersey. And then when I was 20 years old, I think, yeah, I was 20 years old. All of a sudden, I'm bringing the first girl ever to my grandparents' house in New Jersey. And I show up with a blonde Swedish woman, and they're smart. They realize this girl, Bonnie, is not Jewish. So they were very cordial to her. We spent probably 45 minutes to an hour where you could tell they really liked Bonnie. And what happened was uh, my grandmother slipped into the kitchen to prepare the last aspects of the dinner we were going to eat. So I went into the kitchen and I said, "Hey, Nan," I said, "what do you think of Bonnie?" And her answer was, "Well, the table's already set." And what she was saying was, the promise that you made all these years, it appears to us, or definitely to her, but it was both of them, that you cannot keep that promise. So, uh, again, we were actually married in a Jewish ceremony in the home because we couldn't find a synagogue that would marry us because I was marrying a non-Jewish girl. And then we were also married in Bonnie's church a week later, kind of showing that I honored both faiths, Christianity and Jewish. And I wasn't a believer at the time when we got married, but I remember my grandmother taking us, asking if we could go in the back bedroom, which was my parents' bedroom, and she just wanted to say something to us after we had married. Bonnie actually said her vows in Hebrew, and she said to us, she said, "Just make one promise to me: always love each other." So basically, they had gone full circle. So I don't know if I answered your question, but it's a pretty exciting process there. But
Yeah, there's
yeah,
adjustments that are made, and
right,
people see the love that y'all have for each other, and I know that's
right,
really important.
right,
And so continue on. So you're doing this research, and things are starting to make sense.
right.
Was there a moment when you're like, "Oh, I believe this. I believe in Jesus. I believe that He is my Lord and my Savior." Was it more of a season? Was it a gradual change? Walk us through that.
It was definitely a gradual change, excuse me. I just kept reading and reading and underlying, and ultimately Isaiah 53. It's still at that point not a believer. Uh, so when I had that visit with Dr. Goldberg, when I did, in fact, go meet him for lunch, and he made that point that we never have died for our own sins. There's always been the Lord has always provided a system where there was a substitutionary death, which I mentioned right there and then. I bowed my head at Moody Bible Institute and became a believer. That was, I mean, I had so many people witness to me along the way. It took me, I'd say, a little less than a year before I ever accepted. I was still fighting the fact that I'm a Jewish guy. I just can't do this. What will my parents think? And I also think of something like this goes back. Another interesting thing that the Lord did when I was, let's see, I guess I was 14 years old, right after my bar mitzvah. A neighbor, probably about, I think it was 6 or 7 houses down from where we live, not far away, real good friend of mine, Mark. His dad was Catholic, his mom was Jewish, and they celebrated Christmas every year. So he said, "Eric, would you like to come over for Christmas Eve?" Excuse me. And I knew when I would ask my parents, "Can I go over to Mark's house for Christmas Eve?" The answer would have been, no, Eric, you're Jewish. We don't celebrate Christmas. And the Lord had to intervene because they said, you can go, be home by 10 o'clock at night. And I ended up going every year until I was like 19 years old and then moved away. But it was just amazing to me. Like I went to their home for Christmas Eve and they'd be playing a song like the first Noel. Noel, Noel, born is the King of Israel. And I'm thinking like, wait a minute, what is so non-Jewish about Christmas? So the Lord was working with me even when I was 14, 15, before I ever met Bonnie. Just, I think all those things. And I remember nights, and again, just, I never made the connection, but I would sit on the roof of my parents' car, the hood of their car, and look up at the sky. And I said, Lord, or God, I know you're up there. I'd just like to get closer to you. And I don't know why I was asking those questions. That's when I was growing up and no one had ever witnessed to me before. But the Lord was putting me in that position, like to look up and say, I want more. So a personal relationship with Jesus, how it ultimately ended up, I think I was asking for that when I probably was 15, 16, whatever years old. So,
It's amazing looking
yeah,
back how God is weaving different elements of your story into
right,
what he's ultimately making. And so that's incredible to see as you kind of hindsight's 2020, you see
right,
the way God is moving, and that's beautiful.
right,
And one thing I want to note from an apologetic standpoint,
yep,
defending faith and talking about what we believe,
right,
that Bonnie may not have necessarily had all the answers, but what you noticed was an attractive, excuse me, sorry, an
sure,
attractive way of living. You noticed what she was drinking and how it wasn't like what other people were doing at the party.
exactly,
And then she also told her story. And so you noticed her joy. And that is another aspect of apologetics. Sometimes we think about answering difficult intellectual questions.
questions, yeah,
And certainly there. I don't want to minimize that.
right,
Also, are we living in such a way that people notice the joy that we have and the gladness with which we live?
right.
Because
I really wanted what she had. I really wanted it. I said, this, she's so different. She's real. It
yeah,
just became, reading what I read along with her testimony, it just became so real.
and so that's where our testimony comes in. How
Exactly.
are we living in a way that allows our light to shine? But again, this book, The Table, is already set. A beautiful love story between a Jewish man and a Christian woman by Eric Burstock. So, Eric, I'm greatly enjoying this conversation. Now,
Thank you.
moving a little bit in the evangelistic direction,
Right.
talking to a Jewish person, and maybe they have some of these doubts or some of these
Right.
this mindset that you used to have back
Exactly.
in former life. What do you say to people who thought the way that you used to, who think the way that you used to?
Um, I'm just trying to think here. Thought the way I used to would be like, I think one major word of caution is that you never want to say to a Jewish person the word conversion. That's a really scary term for a Jewish person. You're asking them to throw away what they are and become something totally different. And there is no conversion. We Messianic Jews, it's completeness, it's fulfillment. We're fulfilled Jews, we're completed Jews, but we're not converted Jews. You go back to the book of Genesis, okay, and it clearly defines who is a Jew. It's uh, it's the line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So I will always be a Jew, and that would be my. In fact, when I witnessed to my own dad, I said to him, Dad, I said, you have to understand, I believe Jesus is our Messiah, no question about that. I said, but I am always going to be a Jew. You can bury me in a Jewish cemetery. There's nothing. I'm more of a Jew. I'm a better Jew. And I actually heard a Christian once recently say that um, the longer he's a Christian, the more Jewish he realizes he is. How about that? So the point is, it's just Uh, in fact, my own mother, when I had her isolated and was able to read Isaiah 53 to her, I read most of it. I remember her, and I remember asking her, I said, Mom, I said, who, who do you think this is speaking of? And she looked at me and she said, Eric, I believe what you've said. So it's a very difficult transition for a Jewish person, but if they'll read the scriptures, and actually, as we're brought up in the synagogue, we're really all about prayers and listening to the rabbi, but we're not really reading the Old Testament. And there's nothing old about it. We call it the Holy Scriptures. But the point is, if we just read the prophecies, it just becomes so clear. But again, you have to just understand that it's very difficult for a Jewish person to make the the leap of faith to become a believer, but you don't ever want to use that word conversion. There is no conversion. You don't lose your Jewishness. You become more Jewish. If anything else, you should be proud of that our people, that the Messiah came through our people. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
And I think that's where, as Christians, we also need to do a better job of reading the, like you said, maybe Old
right,
Testament, Old Covenant. We need better words for it,
right,
but the Hebrew Scriptures,
right.
because it's all one Bible. And so there is
Exactly,
a continuation of the arc of history, the direction that God's moving in. And so even you see Jeremiah 31, the prophecy about the new covenant.
exactly.
Jesus instituted through Passover, through communion,
Right,
and in the Gospels. And so there's just so many tie-ins. Our church is going through the book of Hebrews right now, talking
great.
about comparing Jesus to Moses and the priest, the sacrificial system, the temple,
Thanks.
tabernacle, all of those things.
Right,
So the more we read of the whole Bible, the more
right,
we learn about the God who made us. And
right.
sometimes Christians, we like the New Testament. It's like, oh, the books of the letters that Paul wrote.
Exactly.
Maybe we're able to understand them better, but really, it's the scriptures do start in Genesis, and that's where we need to start as well.
Yeah,
So I think well said there. Now, if you don't mind,
sure.
there are some pushback questions or arguments that might be used against Jesus as Messiah. Do you mind if I mention one or two and then
Oh no, I'd like you to. Sure. Go
yeah.
right.
Um, One pushback that I'll hear from time to time is that Jesus has not brought world peace. Maybe you've
Right.
that one of the things that the Messiah is supposed to do is to bring a level of peace that maybe we haven't seen yet.
Right.
And so the pushback is, oh, Jesus couldn't be the Messiah because some of the prophecies have not been fulfilled. What might you say to that?
Well, I think we're defining the wrong type of peace. I think the Jewish people were looking for a super King David that would rid Israel and even to this day of all its enemies and that type of thing. And the Prince of Peace, we're not talking about that type of peace. The peace is, uh, is basically the salvation. When we become believers, we can rest in Him and His substitutionary death. That's the definition that I see as the peace. It's not the world's a terrible place, and evil. A lot of people don't believe that things are evil, but the world proves it every day, and it seems like we're waxing worse. The evil, just like the Bible predicted, and so the type of peace that people are looking for, we will rest in peace. The Sabbath is that's the definition of the Sabbath. It's rest, and we will rest in the Lord. And while you're alive, those are the believers. We rest in the Lord. But when we ultimately pass on, we have a resting place.
Mhm.
You know
Yes, and so there is an inner peace. There's a rest we have in Christ.
exactly.
We look towards the future.
Right.
One other aspect I want to talk about is a little bit of anti-Semitism. You
Oh
mentioned
yeah.
a couple stories in your book of just
Right.
horrible things that were done to you and your father.
Right.
Just in just absolute ugliness. So
Right.
that is another pushback. Well, Christians have in church history done some ugly, said some ugly, awful things, done some
Exactly.
terrible things. So why, if I'm a Jewish person, maybe or Orthodox Jew or something along those lines, why would I want to become a Christian if the church has done these things to our people? What might you say to that?
I think that's a hard bridge to cross over. I think it is a stumbling, it's an issue, is that the best way to answer it is just that humans will do that to each other. And there's the Jewish people basically look at, there's two type of people in the world. There's Jewish and Gentile. And really, if you think about it, there's really four type of people in the world. And what those four types are, there's Jewish, there's Gentile, there's Christians, who's a subsection of Gentile, and then there's the Jewish Messianic believers, who are a subsection of Jewish. So again, I guess the point I'm trying to make is, if the Jewish people look at the whole non-Jewish community as Gentile, what they have to realize is there are true Christians that love the Jew. It's a complete opposite. And some that have died for the Jews. There's a story, I don't know if you remember Corey Ten Bloom, okay, who housed Jewish people and tried to keep them from being caught in the Holocaust. Well, that's always been there. There's a true Christian loves the Jewish people, and they realize that Christianity is Jewish. How about that? Christianity is Jewish. Everything they have, I mean, and they consider themselves spiritual Jews, is that they've joined the Jewish people. So again, there's always been that hatred. There's always been that love. There's always been good, and there's always been evil, and they kind of align with each other. A Satan would love for a Jewish person to encounter a Christian, a so-called Christian, or a Gentile for that matter, that still has that hatred. It's still out there. It's growing today. We know that. It's getting worse, and it doesn't surprise me, you know.
Yes, and
Yeah,
ultimately, there is sin and ugliness in the human heart, and so
right.
we point back to Jesus. And Jesus,
Exactly.
he was a Jew,
Right.
right? He would have considered himself one,
Right.
and so ultimately we see the love that he poured out on the cross. That's the same love we are to show to our neighbor. And so,
Absolutely.
I know Martin Luther has wrote some awful things and
Yes.
all of those things, stuff that we do have to answer for as believers. But ultimately, Frank Turek uses this analogy when you're playing a piece of music, whether from whoever, Bach or whatever,
Right.
and Beethoven, if you play it poorly, you don't look at Bach or Beethoven and you say, "Wow, they're terrible musicians." You look at the person playing the music and you say, "Well, they didn't play the music well." It's the same
Right.
thing with Christianity. When Christians do evil, terrible things because we're sinners,
Right.
you don't look and you say, well, Christianity is flawed or Jesus is flawed. You look at the person and say they were wrong for what they did. But going
Right.
back to Jesus, he was a perfect example. He didn't say or do those things. And so sometimes the followers of Jesus or supposed followers do sinful things. And so that's one analogy that I'll pull out from time to time. But speaking of
Right.
anti-Semitism, it is growing and it has been growing. And I think part of the issue is, and I welcome your thoughts on this, part of the issue is the Holocaust generation.
Right.
Those who went through the Holocaust as adults or teenagers that could tell their story, tell their experiences, they are, would you say, mostly gone at this point? They've mostly
Yes. Right.
away. And so what happens then is as that generation has passed on, there are fewer and fewer people who can tell those stories who lived through them. And so
Exactly.
then with that, you get Holocaust denialism, you
Oh,
get
yeah.
a lot of ugly, awful things. And so as someone who's into apologetics myself, and I'm looking to do more in this area, fighting anti-Semitism. Um, I guess where would you suggest someone to start? Resources or organizations? What might you find helpful if people want to learn more about these things? Where might they go?
Um, I would, again, I could point back to the Holocaust to really study the history. And, another great place to be would be to just become friends with a Jewish person. And we're not a homogenous group. I mean, just like anyone else, I mean, we have people that are good, bad, and somewhere in the middle. But again, I think once a person is around most Jewish people, they'll find out that, we're loving people and that we're very generous people, and that we return love with love. I mean, and ex sharing your love as a believer with a Christian. I mean, Jewish people are watching Christians. Okay, once they find out that someone's a Christian, they're watching you, and I think it's just it comes back to that testimony, is that you just you love anyone as a believer, but specifically you have to understand the plight of the Jewish people. You have to learn their history, and the more you learn about your Christianity and the Jewishness of it, like for example, you mentioned the Passover, and just uh, how that was the Last Supper, but again, how important learn all about Passover, learn about Hanukkah, the Hanukkah story, just learn as much as you can about Judaism. Not as from a religious standpoint, but from a biblical standpoint. And that's a vast difference. Is that if you take modern rabbinicalism and what's being taught by the rabbis today versus what's biblical, again, I make that point I made about the only being Jew and Gentile. The Bible teaches more than obviously more than that. That there are, there are Jewish Christians, and that there are Gentiles who are Christians, and there are Gentiles who are not Christian. So again, I think it's just learning more about everything you can possibly, like even reading my book is a good start. And reading, I don't know if you remember, Edith Schaefer wrote a great book called Christianity is Jewish, a great book to read. And there's just books out there. Just educate yourself.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Really important to do,
yeah,
especially as, like I said, people who were there during those events in World War II, uh,
right,
they're not able to tell their story, and so that's up to us to be able to learn about
right,
all that they went through. And so,
right.
again, y'all, the table is already set. If you're on the YouTube and Rumble page, if you're watching this through YouTube or Rumble, you'll be able to see the cover here. A beautiful love story between a Jewish man and a Christian woman, written by Eric Burstock, my guest here today. Eric, I really appreciate your time, and I
Oh, you too.
appreciate you sharing
Thank
your
you.
story and writing it down. And I hope to be able, if you write more, I'd love to have
Great.
you again.
I
Uh,
greatly appreciate it. Yeah.
thank you for all that you've done.
Well, I appreciate it, Nate. It was a great, great time together.
Now, but before I let you
Yep.
go,
Oh, sure.
where might someone buy the book?
Oh, it's available on Amazon. That's the place to get it. And most people read it in 1 or 2 nights, and they just love it. They're just so thankful that it was written, and it's just it was just when I wrote it, I felt like the Lord was sitting next to me. Like I didn't write that myself, and
Wow.
it just tells the story. I think it will encourage any Jewish uh, believer and any Christian that could learn more about the plight of a Jewish person,
Hmm.
to become a believer.
Hmm.
So yeah,
All right, Eric. Thank you for your time, y'all.
you too. Nate.
I hope y'all come on back for more videos
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah,
for sure. And we'll keep doing this again. But until next
Appreciate
time, y'all, you have a wonderful day. Stay safe. Be in
it.
the
Great.
Word, be praying, be active in your church, be active in your community, and I'll talk with you later.